Have you ever wondered why we suffer? Suffering is a universal human experience. It can be caused by many different things, such as illness, death, loss, pain, and disappointment. It can be a very difficult experience to deal with. In this audiobook, we will explore the purpose of suffering. We will look at different spiritual traditions and see what they have to say about the meaning of suffering. We will also discuss how we can cope with suffering and find meaning in it. If you are struggling with suffering, this audiobook is for you. It will offer you insights into the meaning of suffering and help you to find ways to cope with it. Here are some of the things you will learn in this audiobook. The different perspectives on the purpose of suffering. How to cope with suffering in a healthy way. How to find meaning in suffering. How to live in a way that minimizes suffering. Whether you are struggling with suffering right now or not, this audiobook is a valuable resource. It will help you to understand suffering and to find ways to deal with it in a healthy way. Chapter 1: The Problem of Suffering. Suffering is a universal human experience. Everyone experiences it at some point in their lives. It can be caused by many different things, such as illness, death, loss, pain, and disappointment. Suffering can be a very difficult experience to deal with. It can cause us to feel pain, anger, sadness, and despair. It can also make us question the meaning of life and our place in the world. There are many different perspectives on the purpose of suffering. Some people believe that suffering is a punishment from God. Others believe that it is a way for us to learn and grow. Still others believe that it is a way for us to connect with others who are suffering. There is no one answer to the question of the purpose of suffering. However, there are some common themes that emerge from different spiritual traditions. One theme is that suffering can help us to develop compassion. When we see others suffering, it can help us to understand their pain and to empathize with them. This can lead us to develop a deeper sense of compassion for all beings. Another theme is that suffering can help us to appreciate the good things in life. When we experience suffering, it can help us to realize how precious life is and how important it is to cherish the good moments. Finally, suffering can help us to connect with our spiritual nature. When we experience suffering, it can help us to let go of our attachments to the material world and to open ourselves up to a deeper spiritual reality. The problem of evil. The problem of suffering is often framed as a problem of evil. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, why does He allow suffering to exist? This is a difficult question to answer, and there is no easy answer. Some people believe that God allows suffering to exist in order to teach us and to help us grow. They argue that suffering can help us to develop compassion, to appreciate the good things in life, and to connect with our spiritual nature. Others believe that God does not allow suffering to exist, but that it is a result of the free will of human beings. They argue that we have the ability to choose to do good or evil, and that when we choose to do evil, we create suffering in the world. Still others believe that there is no answer to the problem of evil. They argue that it is a mystery that we cannot understand. The search for meaning. If there is no easy answer to the problem of suffering, then what can we do? How can we find meaning in suffering? One way to find meaning in suffering is to connect with our spiritual nature. When we experience suffering, we can open ourselves up to a deeper spiritual reality. We can connect with the divine, with the ground of all being, or with whatever we understand as the source of all love and compassion. Another way to find meaning in suffering is to connect with others who are suffering. When we see others who are suffering, it can help us to understand our own pain and to feel less alone. It can also help us to develop compassion for others. Finally, we can find meaning in suffering by trying to make a difference in the world. We can use our suffering to help others who are suffering, or we can use it to work for a more just and compassionate world. Conclusion: the problem of suffering is a difficult one, but it is not an impossible one. We can find meaning in suffering by connecting with our spiritual nature, by connecting with others who are suffering, and by trying to make a difference in the world. If we can do these things, then we can transform suffering into something that is meaningful and redemptive. Chapter 2: The Purpose of Suffering. There are many different perspectives on the purpose of suffering. Some people believe that suffering is a punishment from God. Others believe that it is a way for us to learn and grow. Still others believe that it is a way for us to connect with others who are suffering. There is no one answer to the question of the purpose of suffering. However, there are some common themes that emerge from different spiritual traditions. One theme is that suffering can help us to develop compassion. When we see others suffering, it can help us to understand their pain and to empathize with them. This can lead us to develop a deeper sense of compassion for all beings. Another theme is that suffering can help us to appreciate the good things in life. When we experience suffering, it can help us to realize how precious life is and how important it is to cherish the good moments. Finally, suffering can help us to connect with our spiritual nature. When we experience suffering, it can help us to let go of our attachments to the material world and to open ourselves up to a deeper spiritual reality. The Book of Job. One of the most famous explorations of the purpose of suffering is found in the Book of Job in the Old Testament. Job is a righteous man who suffers a series of terrible calamities. He loses his family, his wealth, and his health. He questions God, asking why he is being punished. In the end, God does not answer Job's question directly. However, he does reveal to Job that he does not understand the ways of God. He also reveals that suffering is not always a punishment. Sometimes, it is a way for God to test our faith and to help us grow. The Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is a collection of Buddhist scriptures that explores the nature of suffering. The scriptures teach that suffering is a natural part of life. It is caused by our attachments to the material world and to our own desires. The scriptures also teach that there is a way to overcome suffering. This is done through the practice of non-attachment and compassion. When we let go of our attachments, we free ourselves from suffering. When we develop compassion, we are able to connect with others who are suffering and to help them. The Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is a Hindu scripture that explores the relationship between suffering and free will. The scriptures teach that we are all free to choose our actions. However, we are also subject to the consequences of our actions. The scriptures also teach that suffering can be a way to learn and grow. When we experience suffering, we have an opportunity to reflect on our actions and to make better choices in the future. Conclusion: there is no one answer to the question of the purpose of suffering. However, there are many different perspectives on the matter. These perspectives can help us to understand suffering and to find meaning in it. If we can learn to accept suffering as a part of life, we can begin to transform it into something that is meaningful and redemptive. Chapter 3: How to Deal with Suffering. There is no easy way to deal with suffering. However, there are some things that we can do to cope with it. One important thing is to allow ourselves to feel our pain. It is important to acknowledge our suffering and to allow ourselves to grieve. Trying to suppress our pain will only make it worse. Another important thing is to find support. Talking to a therapist, counselor, or spiritual advisor can help us to process our pain and to find ways to cope with it. Finally, it is important to find meaning in our suffering. This can be done by connecting with our spiritual nature, by helping others who are suffering, or by finding something positive to learn from our experience. Here are some specific things that you can do to deal with suffering. Allow yourself to feel your pain. Don't try to suppress it or pretend that it's not there. Allow yourself to cry, scream, or whatever else you need to do to express your pain. Talk to someone you trust. Talking about your suffering can help you to process it and to feel less alone. Do something that you enjoy. This can help to take your mind off of your pain and to relax. Spend time in nature. Being in nature can help to connect you with your spiritual nature and to feel a sense of peace. Practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. This can help you to accept your pain and to let go of your attachment to it. Help others who are suffering. This can help you to find meaning in your own suffering and to connect with others who are going through the same thing. Remember, you are not alone. Everyone experiences suffering at some point in their lives. There are people who care about you and who want to help. There are also resources available to help you cope with suffering. If you are struggling to deal with suffering, please reach out for help. There is no shame in asking for help, and it can make a big difference in your life. Chapter 4: The End of Suffering. Suffering is a part of life, but it does not have to define us. We can learn to cope with suffering and to find meaning in it. We can also choose to live in a way that minimizes suffering for ourselves and others. The end of suffering is not about the absence of pain. It is about the presence of peace, love, and compassion. It is about living a life that is aligned with our values and our highest purpose. There are many different paths to the end of suffering. Some people find it through spiritual practice, such as meditation or yoga. Others find it through therapy or counseling. Still others find it through simply living a compassionate and mindful life. There is no one right path to the end of suffering. However, there are some common steps that we can all take. First, we need to accept that suffering is a part of life. We cannot avoid it, but we can learn to cope with it. Second, we need to find meaning in our suffering. This can be done by connecting with our spiritual nature, by helping others who are suffering, or by finding something positive to learn from our experience. Third, we need to let go of our attachments. When we are attached to things, we suffer when we lose them. Letting go of our attachments can help us to reduce suffering. Fourth, we need to live in the present moment. When we dwell on the past or worry about the future, we suffer. Living in the present moment can help us to find peace and happiness. Fifth, we need to cultivate compassion. When we are compassionate, we are able to connect with others who are suffering and to help them. Compassion can help us to reduce suffering in the world. The end of suffering is not an easy goal to achieve. However, it is possible. By following the steps outlined above, we can reduce suffering in our lives and in the world. Conclusion: suffering is a universal human experience. However, it does not have to define us. We can choose to live in a way that minimizes suffering and that cultivates peace, love, and compassion. If we can do this, then we can experience the end of suffering, even if it is only for a moment. And in that moment, we can taste the true meaning of life.